Hello and welcome to Table Talk, a show where I chat with other creators in the TTRPG space about how they run their tables. I'm Danger Dan Jers, the GM and host of D&Dark, and joining us at the table today is a player, GM, professional photographer, and DM for Dungeons & Cabins, Eliam Weinstock. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for swinging by to chat with me. To get us started, can you tell us a little about yourself, your history with TTRPGs, and, of course, about Dungeons & Cabins?
Yeah, of course. I have been playing D&D for about 10 years. 7 or 8 of those years have been as a DM. I started playing D&D at the beginning of high school when a friend back then introduced me to it while we were actually on a music department camping trip for the orchestra and the band and the choir and all that sort of stuff. And he was just running a game and I got involved. That just started this whole thing where it just became part of my life.
I totally understand that. I got pulled in tangentially in college, dabbled a little bit in Pathfinder, a little bit in D&D, and started off with a couple of Pathfinder one-shots before I understood what the difference was. Slowly kind of worked my way through there, started with Grant Howitt's Honey Heist, and that was kind of my first foray into DMing, and had an absolute blast with that before going into Dungeons & Dragons 5e for full campaign stuff.
Yeah, no, I remember Honey Heist. I had a blast playing that one.
To me, it feels like one of the perfect entryways into the hobby. It's so simple, very easy to teach, very easy to learn, and it's such a fun, silly premise.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a good toe dipper. But if we're talking about first experiences DMing, mine was very rocky. I got into DMing my second to last year of high school, where there was a D&D club, and seeing that I was the only person in that friend circle they knew who played D&D, they brought me on. I was like, you are the DM now, because none of them knew how to play D&D. And I started off doing what Brennan Lee Mulligan is doing right now.
Oh.
Except very unprepared and also just much stupider, where I was like, yes, I can DM 12 people at once.
Woof.
It was a nightmare and a half, just combat alone. But we ended up splitting the groups up and did a bi-weekly game. And that's when my second hurdle came, where I did a homebrew game, not necessarily knowing what was going to happen. And the moment that they were like, oh, okay, cool, let's go out of the city, that quickly derailed, and I scrambled quickly to port over Curse of Strahd. That was definitely a memorable first experience DMing, I'd say. But yeah, then I DM'd that group for a few months, then COVID happened, and then it just kind of unfortunately fizzled out.
Yeah, I made the, I guess bold is the generous word for it, choice of learning how to GM on mic.
Oh.
So D&Dark was the first campaign that I had run. I had done a couple of one-shots beforehand, but I was talked into it by a friend of mine, Grayson, who plays the Invisible Man. He talked me into making a podcast out of it. A few of us had a little bit of experience, but we were mostly learning in real time doing the show. So I look back at the early parts of D&Dark, and comparatively, we've come a long way. It's very easy to disparage your early works.
Yeah, it's like seeing the first season of an animated show.
Exactly. Especially with a sitcom or anything, looking back at the first season of The Office, first season of Parks and Rec, a lot of those types of shows, they usually take a little bit of time to find their identity and footing. For me, I felt like we really locked in with our show by about episode 16. That's usually my recommended starting point for people trying to jump on and in. But yeah, I can really pinpoint and see my own learning points throughout early parts of the show, where I was very siloed into my plotting and planning and much more linear in my approach. I'm a lot more confident in how I approach the table now at this point, which, to throw it as a question back to you, how have you seen your own growth points and what your style has kind of turned into?
That is a really good question. I know from the first time I started DMing, it was very much I stuck to the script. I maybe had some like cool NPCs that I would like insert in, but it was very like rigid. And obviously, I've come a long way since then. The fact that I'm not a huge fan of running combat, don't get me wrong, I've learned to enjoy narrating combat and facilitating it. But I know that, like, over the years, I have learned this more and more about myself. I am very much a roleplay heavy DM. I just love the narrative. I see the game as like collaborative storytelling. In that, I also like encourage my players to have all the agency they want. I will say, like, looking back at like the Curse of Strahd campaign, that was not necessarily the case. I do see my shortcomings in that, where I was very railroady and it wasn't necessarily the best of times. I mean, my players were having a good time, but it was like I knew I was pushing rather than like introducing. But over the years, I've come into my own style. I'm very I like introducing new rules or like tweaking mechanics within the game that I'm like, I get why this is here. I don't want that to run in my campaigns. And there's definitely some negotiating in that during Dungeons and Cabins, just with like, okay, what are some homebrew rules that I can integrate into the campaign without, skewing everyone else's experience. Like I said, I'm just very much a role play intrigue heavy DM on my end.
I relate to that very heavily. One of the things that I do want to peek through your brain a little bit about what that conversation looks like on the back end of when you are having to run something that is kind of tied together with what these other tables are doing within the constraints of the event. How much does that homebrew and rules conversation come into play between like both your table and the wider event?
With that, all the DMs have their own specific homebrew rules. Nothing that is like, narrative changing, but like I know Alec Blockman from the first week, he had a homebrew rule where you either had to roll inside the dice tray or it didn't count. And that was definitely a little bit like, I never really thought about it like that. Me, I just roll onto the map and be like, that's the number. And I think you might have noticed this when I went to your table, where I just asked like, okay, how are we doing crits? How are we doing healing potions? How are we doing all those sort of things? Well, like with those like little things, like obviously a conversation needs to be had with Sammy, but like there's a little bit of wiggle room with that. But in terms of the broader rules, we stick to a set list.
Gotcha. I imagine a big part of that too. I kind of felt like the general equalizer with a lot of the different tables, both from the player and GM side of things for the event this year, was deciding to use the 2024 rule set, which at the time was very, very new. So we kind of collectively had on both sides, everybody on unsure footing of trying to navigate like, okay, what are the differences with this new rule set and how do we navigate this space? So I feel like being in that kind of space of uncertainty had some benefits as well as drawbacks on both sides.
Oh, definitely. And I think like, especially when it came to character creation, I don't know if you experienced that in your like session 0, but like we definitely had some marriages between the two systems where like, so long as it was a 5.5e background, we could like integrate a necromancer, for example. Like that's one of the things that we noticed in the first week during session 0 and character creation stuffs, where like I had my players asking me if, classes like necromancer was still on the table because that's not integrated into the new set of rules. There were definitely times at the camp where I made a ruling based off of like 5e rules, and then one of my players was like, actually, I think this. I was like, oh, you're right, my bad. I will say, like, I definitely prefer 5e myself, and I think I'll continue running my games in 5e, but it was a good learning experience, to say the least.
Absolutely. It was my first foray into the new updated rule set, and I like ideas from the 2024 rule set. I think in general, I prefer the 2014 one. I think the power creep is kind of getting to a breaking point It feels like the player characters are just a little bit too strong at this point. But that might just be a personal sensibility.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Like, for me, my main thing, which sounds weird coming from a DM, is like a lot of it felt like, okay, this is the DM's discretion, refer to the DM. And while that is well and good, that doesn't seem like a new system. That just seems like, okay, you can either go with this or refer back to 2014 rules.
That's a common criticism of like a lot of things that Wizards of the Coast has been putting out over the last several years, is they've been skewing as a design philosophy a lot more non-committally, with the general caveat that all systems really come down to the GM's discretion and the players, and like it's a conversation from both of them. But it feels like what they're producing more and more is suggestions of themings of this new set, or like, this is what you might do, but it's really the GM's job to decide what the rules for this are.
Yeah, and like, I mean, don't get me wrong, that's the magic of the game. No two tables are alike. You'll always have variations, you always have DMs who disagree with rules, but they are taking written rules that are concrete and established and deciding what to do with them.
Yeah, there are plenty of virtues with the stuff that they're putting out more recently too, and a lot of really cool ideas. But I know Daniel, who plays the Mummy in D&Dark, recently ran a Spelljammer campaign, and that was his big complaint about the new Spelljammer release, was there weren't really any rules for how vessel-to-vessel combat worked. It was just kind of a general vibe and suggestion. And what the book kind of recommended was, just don't. Just get the ships close enough together that you can board and then do just standard person-to-person playing field combat. And so he had to kind of Frankenstein together from, I think it was 2E was when the first Spelljammer came out. I think he put together that with the Ghosts of Saltmarsh rules for ship combat and like a little bit of Starfinder rules, and kind of patched together a functional ship-to-ship combat thing. But I know that was a big gripe that he had, was that the game didn't really provide a framework for how that should work. And with a like spacefaring thing, you would think that would be like a core aspect of that.
Yeah. It's like having Star Wars without the lightsabers. It's
exactly.
And I ran into like similar issues when I was running like more futuristic campaigns, where I had to like quickly either find third-party systems that did like ship-to-ship combat, or I had to just do it myself. It's unfortunate, but what can you do?
Yeah, it comes with the territory. Not to be like too negative about the medium as a whole.
Oh yeah, we still love it.
Oh yeah, it's still an absolute blast and a great time. And like I said, with the 2024 release, there are ideas that I really enjoy about it. There's a lot of like little new class features that are some fun quality of life improvements.
Oh yeah.
And some fun ideas that they're exploring. You could argue how well they're implemented, but I like the ideas that they're starting to toy around with.
Oh no, I fully agree with that. There are quite a few ideas that I do like from this. Little class features that give, classes like fighters more to do than just hit things.
Absolutely. So to transition this back towards Dungeons and Cabins a little bit more, can you tell me a little bit about your process of getting involved with that? What was that like, being brought into the fold there?
Oh, it's a funny one, actually. So originally I didn't come to them as a DM. I saw an Instagram ad. At first I thought it was maybe a scam. I was like, huh. Then I went to the website. I saw the people involved. I looked them up and I was like, oh, okay. Then I reach out to them and be like, hey, I really like what you're doing. Do you need a camp photographer? Because I do photography. And Sammy came back and was like, hi, thank you for your interest. We're not looking for a photographer at this time, but we'll keep you in mind for the future. And then I put the matter to bed. And I'm like, well, I tried. And then I have one of those like moments where I just shoot up out of bed and I'm like, oh, fuck. That's right. I'm a DM. And I'm just like, oh my God, well, duh. So I emailed them and was like, hey, I'm not sure if you remember me. I reached out about like being a camp photographer. I was wondering if there are other ways to get involved. Like, are you looking for DMs? And Sammy responded quickly and was like, we're actually considering on expanding. I'll get back to you on that when we have some more definitive news. A few weeks later, we're looking for new DMs. So then, interview process, what my DMing style is like, what you think the role of a DM is supposed to be, and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I got to meet with some of the DMs. I got to suggest some things for the campaign, introduce like my own monster, and yeah, the rest is history. I DM'd that first time. It was an amazing experience. And evidently I did something right, so they brought me back for a second year.
Yeah, Sammy had a lot of good praise for you and your style, and sees you as a very invaluable member of the team. So you clearly made a very good and strong impression.
Oh.
And it's fun that you were able to bring forth and contribute monsters and everything to what the plan was for all of that. In that kind of give and take, how much were you stylistically affected by doing that event? And like, what have you learned from the other GMs? And what do you think of your own style has kind of rubbed off on them?
In hindsight, there were quite a few things, primarily with how to with some new perspectives in role playing and pushing a narrative. Like I remember in the first week when Joey and Zach were head on head with the big bad and like seeing how they interacted. Well, I did not think that at the time. I had to drive from San Francisco to San Bernardino. So that gives me a whole lot of time to think. And I was like, okay, that I can see how I can integrate this into the finale for my party. And between like prepping for sessions and like running around taking pictures throughout the weekend, I never really had time to properly sit down and reflect on like, okay, Mayana is doing this, I could borrow from that. But like, there were definitely things that, when driving back, thinking about like, it was a good learning experience for me, especially since, full disclosure, this is the only D&D event that I have done. I am primarily I'm an at-home DM. I'm looking into working at some game stores to be an in-house DM right now. But like, it was incredibly daunting for me, especially that first year. Me being like, oh, I'm a hobby DM for like 8 years, and then you have people like Johnny Stanton, Joey, Zach, who like they are established and they are known, and I'm just like, hello. And I will say, like, my experience DMing with them has definitely put those like insecurities to bed, where I realize this is a community. There are people who are more established, but like, we're all here for the same reason. We are here to have fun. We are here to tell an amazing story. And I'm not entirely sure what I have done exactly to rub off on other DMs, but like, if anything, maybe like this is not necessarily the hottest of takes, but I think that players should have agency in how they fail.
Mm.
Similar to natural 20s, like Matt Mercer's How Do You Want to Do This? I have How Do You Fuck Up?
That's fantastic.
And obviously it's a conversation to have with my players where I'm like, okay, this is how I do failures. Do not abuse it. I'm not going to be a vengeful DM, but I am going to give you a proportionate consequence for that failure. So instead of just like, oh, I just miss, no, you're going to twist your ankle. But in that, like, it makes things more fun and more fair.
Oh, absolutely.
If anything rubbed off on anyone, I would say maybe that bit. But like, again, I think we're all like focused on our own games. Maybe you overhear, like in my case, like I overheard like Mayana monologue at some point, and I was like, oh, that's a good description. I'll steal that. And like, obviously, like, we debrief after a session or something like that, just see where everyone is at and how they've dealt with this, or how they tried to flavor certain aspects of the game. But I will say I do like my How Do You Fuck Up system a lot.
It's great. And that's very similar to a thing that Jordan, who plays the Wolfman in our show, does. She GMs our home games. And it's a thing that we have just started to do a little bit. We started it with specifically on perception checks, and we started to apply it in general, just because there's the typical wall that you kind of bump into with failed perception checks or nat 1 perception checks. It's kind of impossible not to metagame around that of like, well, obviously the information you're going to tell me from this nat 1 is going to be unreliable. So They kind of intuitively take the opposite from that. A thing that we've started doing to get around that she started doing and that I have stolen from her wholesale, is with a perception check in particular, if you roll a nat 1, you tell me what you think you see with a nat 1.
Ooh, I really like that. I did not really consider perception checks with that. Like, I always, like, whenever I ask, like, how do you fuck up? They're like, oh, I was looking at the sun, got in my eye. Like, environmental things affecting how you perceive. I did not think about, just tell me what you think you see. I'm going to steal that.
It's been a lot of fun, and it gives you some really good ammunition as a GM and kind of gets around the like weird metagaming of information there. But we've started applying that to other things, and I love the combat how do you fuck up. I similarly have done for nat 1s coming up in combat. A lot of it was me getting tired of coming up with things, and then after a certain point was like, I don't know, you tell me what happens with a nat 1. And that had so much better results that I've started doing that more as a principal thing. And so I agree wholeheartedly with that mindset, and I love it. The players tend to be so much more punishing to themselves than anything that I would heap up, and it's way more fair because it's their idea.
Yeah, and it's also more reflective of what they want to get out of this. Let's use like a charisma check as an example. I could tell you like, oh yeah, you bite your tongue while talking to the king. I mean, while it does get the point across, it's a little thought terminating. But what do you think you say to the king? Like they're running away from the palace guard, starting a intercontinental war. Your players are literally telling you what they want, and then you can just run with that.
There's so much potential with that. It's a great mindset to have. And then this is just a small observation that I had from seeing you DM very briefly in Dungeons and Cabins. We had, as context for the listeners, for the finale, we had the different tables with their various GMs rotated around briefly. And so we got little snippets of being able to interact with other GMs. And so I did not have Eliam as my GM for my table, but I very briefly had him swing by to play the big bad. And the setup for that was, it was this god who was trapped in a mirror dimension that was breaking through. And so we were fighting different fractals and like aspects of this god that each of the GMs represented. And a thing that I immediately noticed when you came by, there were two things that have stuck out between myself and Jordan, who was also at the table, that we were chatting about in the aftermath. You had probably the single coolest description of a combat thing that I heard the whole week. And also you had a particular physicality that you brought to it that I noticed was pretty unique to you. You were very, very physical in your descriptions, and you did a lot of like body language. You put your whole body and extreme gesticulation into everything that you were doing that really brought a good infusion of energy into it. And then the one like mental image that stuck out for both myself and Jordan was your description of, I think it was the big bad receiving a critical hit and then breaking and splitting apart into fractals and then collapsing back together, was such a cool, visceral image that stuck out in both of our heads. So from my perspective as a player, those were the things that I clocked and noticed from you as like a particular Eliam-ism.
Yeah, no, like I should mention that, like with like the last, I mean, it's the last session of the camp. So like I go all out. Like I fucked up my knees pretty bad a few times. I'm just like simulating deaths, especially at my table where like falling on the ground. I should mention, like I have fibromyalgia. My knees are that of a 50-year-old, and it's just like, oh, that I'm gonna feel that tomorrow. But it's the last session. I want to give my players my all, and like it's those flavorings, like with the like shattering with like different spectrums of light and then collapsing back into each other. Each DM has their own flavoring, and I do love seeing, it just in my periphery, how my fellow DMs like interpret and embody their ideas of how this person acts. So yeah, like I will say though, like the epic style combat is a new thing for me. I would say that and like the constrained time was like the biggest curveball. Up until like Dungeons and Cabins, I'm an at-home DM. Yes, we have like, you know, okay, we can only play for like 4 hours. You can only play for X amount, but like it's an indefinite campaign. Whereas with this, you have to be on schedule. You have to like reach this point. Otherwise, everything falls apart. So that was definitely new for me in terms of just time management. Sorry, I realize I'm like jumping all over the place.
Oh, no, that's more than fair. And that actually segues very well into another one of my questions, which is just in terms of the challenges that the event presented to you and in the things that you've learned along the way, is there any information that you know now on the back end of this that you wish you knew before you started?
Going forward, I may run my section of the modules beforehand with like some close friends just to see how it all comes together rather than like having almost a head canon of what I want to happen and then have that like completely fall apart. Like I would probably run the game beforehand just to see how good is timing, how long should players spend in each section, or like what assumptions do players make and like could possibly go wrong as well. Like my my philosophy is given the choice between left and right, the players will burn a hole straight through the fucking maze. And that's partially the reason why I like with my homebrews, I keep my planning very loose. I have an overarching narrative. I know what I want to happen, but I also have contingency plans in case, they decide to burn a hole through the fucking maze.
Those are some of the best moments, too, are the things that you can't plan for. We had the entire setup for our upcoming second season of D&Dark sprang from one of my players burning a hole through the world and causing a miniature apocalypse.
No!
We, like, for specific in-show context, we had one of the central MacGuffins of the first season was the Necronomicon, and at the mid-season finale, the players were able to get a hold of it, and one of my players set up a long game scheme that partially worked, mostly failed, resulted in globally several holes and rifts into the abyss opening up all throughout the world with demons spilling out everywhere.
Oh, I love that.
And so that became the setup for what season 2 is going into. It provided some immediate consequences for that campaign, but that became the inciting incident for the next one. So you never know what kind of opportunities will come up from your players just running with the wildest ideas.
No, exactly. Like with like both weekends, I was throwing the best curveballs with my players. The first one, I don't think they definitely killed a few people, but like they delegated it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like in the first weekend when we were investigating a cultist stronghold and like trying to get rid of everyone, this is how the how do you fuck up thing works in the practice, where they saw a room with a manticore and 2 cultists. One of them does minor illusion for a jackrabbit to rile up the manticore. They roll on that one. I say, how do you fuck up? And they explain that, like, it doesn't just distract the manticore, it puts him into a frenzy, a blood frenzy. And that room essentially became a blender. We're talking about like 30 cultists here, where all of them are like, oh, they're screaming in that room. Let's go. And the Manticore just killed like 25 out of 30 of those cultists. Where,
jeez.
Like, because there were so many people on the board, I did like waves. So like, blue team, go! Red team, go! And they just died. And then they started like resurrecting cultists, which had like canceled celebrity impersonators and all that sort of stuff, where I think we had like a gnome FK Jr.
Oh my God.
Just say like, extremely like out of pocket things like I drank swamp water every time he attacked. And like I love that. The second weekend was the exact opposite. They were the most diplomatic party I have ever encountered. Killing was at a minimum. They taught like the first session where everyone was involved with the doppelgangers. They befriended one of the doppelgangers, and that just set the tone for the rest of the of the campaign. And yeah, like I love that. I say if given a chance between left or right, they'll burn a hole through the maze. That's not a bad thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it is a wonderful thing. And that's why I love DMing so much. It's because I come in with a certain narrative in mind and they see it and like they can either run with it or they can run with it.
Oh, yeah. It's the beauty of what this medium does best, I feel. And that's a big part of why what I feel like my personal style has kind of developed into in terms of like what I plan and prep for. I have a very villain-centric mode of planning where I know what my big bad's goals are and what steps they are taking to achieve it. And I generally, in terms of my planning, set up what is the situation that the players are walking into, and then leave everything else up to chance. Whatever happens from there happens. And what cascades from that, I know generally what the bad guys are trying to do, so I'll know generally what types of things they will pivot towards based on whatever chaos the players introduce, but I don't know the specifics, and that's kind of come over time as, like, that's settled into a formula that has worked for me so far.
Nice. I believe that the most important character in a narrative is not the hero, but the villain. The villain is the one who incites. You do not have a hero's journey without a disruption of the hero's day-to-day life. So, like, I look at my world and see what is wrong with it. Either that or I reverse engineer where I see, okay, what does my villain want to do aside from just world destruction and world domination? Because that's boring. What is the root of their goal here? And then I work backwards and be like, oh, okay, so they don't like the government. Why don't they like the government? It's corrupt. Why are they corrupt? Blah, 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 blah. And then, boom, I have a whole society ready to go. And, it can go both ways. I also operate on the philosophy, there is no such thing as a perfect society. And if there is, or there appears to be, something is deeply wrong underneath the surface. It's like the Star Trek The Next Generation episode where you have this utopia where like there's no crime and all that sort of stuff. And the moment someone does something wrong, death penalty, even stepping on the grass, death penalty. It's that kind of like everything seems fine, but something's terribly wrong. And then I run with that because, yeah, I want my players to have a moment where they question, is the villain right? And I think that gives for not just like introspective playing, but like it is a terrifying RP moment where like you find yourself agreeing with him.
Mm-hmm. If you can pull that off, it is unreal how good that feels. One of the things that I take as one of my biggest personal victories with the campaign for D&Dark was an exchange that I had with one of our patrons after the finale, where they said in their reaction and response to it, it's a good thing that the player characters were the heroes in this, because I would have sided with the bad guy 100%. That got me. He had a point and was right. And so I took that as a big personal victory.
Yeah, like even in like, Oops All Bits D&D podcast, like Legends of Evantris, they have compelling villains. And like, don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place for like the mustache twirler.
Mm-hmm.
But that's for places like, Honey Heist.
Yeah. And it can be fun to sprinkle those in amongst more serious villains to give you that contrast.
Oh, exactly. And you can do like misdirects, like what they did with the first season of Vox Machina, the animated, where like it has to be the advisor with like the snake-like voice. Nope, it's not. Like there's a time and a place for a mustache twirling villain, then you can do really fun things with it, but it should not be the main villain, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. There's, I love a good misdirect, and one of my favorite tactics is to hide a big twist behind a small twist. One of my biggest inspirations is Final Fantasy VI. I had the SNES cartridge of, at the time, Final Fantasy III growing up, and it was well worn. It's one of my favorite pieces of media, tried and true, and the big thing that I love about it that's so unique to that game, one of the joke things that I've heard as like a one-sentence descriptor of the game is Final Fantasy VI is Star Wars, but halfway through, the Emperor is killed by the Joker, who takes over the story.
Oh, I love that.
the second in command villain who is the in-your-face mustache twirling one that like, okay, this guy's obviously the minion, and this evil emperor, who the evil emperor has been the big bad of the past 5 games. So clearly we know what we're doing. The evil emperor's got to be the big bad. And all right, we've set aside, we've fought and we've dealt with second in command mustache twirling minion. And then the mustache twirling minion takes over the game, wins, and then you have to basically put the pieces back together from after the apocalypse. So I love using multiple different types of villains concurrently to skirt expectations, and having the second in command be the actual true villain the whole time. It can sometimes be an obvious go, but I love when you can pull off that kind of subversion.
Oh yeah, no, I'm a slut for subversion. I love it, especially if you're able to pull that off. There's always a joke in my party where like we have a little guy NPC, and they keep on joking like, oh yeah, he's gonna be some like fucked up overlord or something like that, and like taking notes. But no, there's those little misdirects that I absolutely love.
Which you brought up Star Trek earlier as a point of inspiration. What types of media like Star Trek do you pull from that inspires you for these kinds of stories? What things are near and dear to you that are your big, like, core pillars of inspiration?
I will say what my first homebrew campaign was based on, and like what I've kind of modeled my other campaigns on, is the Cycle of Iran series by Edward W. Robertson. I love it so much. Like the world building is amazing. The magic system with like ether and nether is amazing. Like I tried to integrate it into my campaigns at one point, and it was almost too hard worth the effort to try to like categorize all of the spells of D&D to fit into these 1 or 2 categories, because some of these do not even pertain, and then I don't want to limit, and it's a whole thing. But like when I first started out DMing, it was pretty much a carbon copy of the book, down to like the characters, the book, the story, like all that. And through the years, it shed. Right now I have my own thing that is now like kind of inspired by Edward W. Robertson's work, where like if you squint your eyes, you can see the dynamics. You can see like, oh, this heavily religious nation seems very familiar. But like I would say that, and some like exercises I like to do also like heavily inspire me, where I, go on Pinterest, I see like concept art or like environmental art and try to create a narrative around it, especially if it's like, supernatural things like floating rocks or like megafauna or megaflora. I'm just like, okay, what is happening here? Why is this the case? Same thing with music. Like when I was driving down to DNC or Dungeons and Cabins, I was listening to Leve's Fragile for like a solid hour, just like recreating, okay, this is an amazing scene. Will it happen? Maybe. Will it happen in the way that I envision it? Probably not. But like, I find like not to be that like that guy, but like I find inspiration everywhere. Like I'm doing my MA in history right now, and a lot of my campaigns, how I do my campaigns is I democratize them. So I have like a list of like premises ranging from like high fantasy to low fantasy, and give them out to my players, and they vote on what premise they want in the same setting, but at different points in that setting's history. And like I integrate like what I learn in my studies, from like the methodology to like right now I'm studying strategies of colonial erasure in history. You have a nation that, has this one narrative, but it's either a very, very closely cropped picture that doesn't give you the full story, or it's not in the history and you learn from someone else. I see inspiration around me everywhere. Like at the risk of sounding pretentious, but
no, I completely understand that. I pull from so many different sources that in trying to go through it in my head, it's such a wide net that it's a little pointless listing out and like trying to pinpoint what the central ones are. There's a few like particular wells that I keep coming back to. My general strategy, what I will tend to do is I will settle on either a set piece or an encounter concept, which usually it'll be the set piece first of like, what's a fun setting or like visual that I can kind of anchor a moment of the campaign around. Okay, what's a fun game that I can extrapolate from that? And like, what is the thing that I will build around that? So like for Big Ben, for example, in D&Dark, of like, okay, I know obviously we're in Victorian London. We've got to have the iconic clock tower there. What do I do in there? Okay, well, with Big Ben, where my brain goes to, the media that I've seen for that is The Great Mouse Detective. Had like the fun Big Ben sequence of going up through the tower, dealing with all the gears and cogs and all that. Okay, I'll use that as like a visual motif and inspiration for how I build around this. So I'll have this vertical dungeon crawl through these gears and cogs. Okay, so I'll have falling has to be a big part of this. How do I make sure that the risk of falling happens constantly? Okay, I'll have everybody be hunted down by specific creatures through there. And then I'm pulling from other media of like, part of it was a timeliness thing because Alien Romulus had just come out and we had just done our Halloween special where we played in the Alien TTRPG. And I wanted to have a stalker type enemy, so I used sloths because they're very similar to xenomorphs in how they're set up. So it became Great Mouse Detective and Alien mashed up together is what this area is. So I'll usually start with the set piece and then pull from wherever my brain goes to. I've got another section of the game that is like, oh, this is like that one party mission from Dishonored. So I'll make a little social thing there. Or for like the Frankenstein bit of building a body is kind of like crafting. So let me look at whatever crafting mechanics I can cobble together. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's usually where I tend to like stem from.
Oh, yeah, no, totally. Like with Silk Song that came out, I sunk like 60 hours into that game, just in acts 1 and 2 alone. Same thing with like Hollow Knight. Like I have a period in my world's history where like in Empire Falls, I draw heavily on Hollow Knight and Silk Song, just in terms of like figuring out, okay, how do these empires fall? What is the inciting incident? And also, how can I make it interesting and interactive with the players? Disease, like that. It's just a nice mishmash of like all the things we love in life.
Oh, yeah. My campaigns tend to be such a hodgepodge of just my personal hyperfixations. But that feels like the way to do it.
Not exactly.
Keeping an eye on time, we're starting to come to the end of the questions that I've got prepared for you. Just want to throw it back to you. Are there any other little bits of wisdom or advice you would have for anybody wanting to try to GM for an event like Dungeons and Cabins, that like things that you've learned along the way that you would impart to somebody just starting out and stepping into the role that you did?
Yeah, just you heard how I got involved. I saw something that I really believed in, and I just reached out. I shot my shot. Granted, I made it on the first, or technically first and a half attempt, but like, yeah, just reach out and see what happens. It's like, I mean, I would suggest either looking for something that is coming out that is like new, and also like look outside of like your immediate space and see what opportunities are there, but also don't forget your backyard, because more often than not you'll be surprised. There may not be we're hiring, but like it's a nice pull to be like, hey, come to our store, we have an in-house DM, just explore. I know that's generic as fuck, but like, yeah,
there really is something to be said about taking that leap of faith. And
oh yeah,
I think having some persistence behind it too is a big part of it. It makes me think of, as part of my bachelor's degree, we had to get an internship. And when I was looking for places to intern with, I was reaching out to a bunch of places, but I had one primary one that I really wanted to get. And I managed to get my internship there because I gave them a call once a week for 2.5 months. And then they finally said, all right, we get it. We've got an opportunity for you to come in and start interning here. You can slot in this spot. And I was able to get my internship that way just from having the faith to call and reach out and the persistence to keep going.
Exactly. And then, yeah, the persistence is key here, because like it's one thing to say like no, but if they're like not looking for something right now, that does not mean that they aren't looking for something later.
Absolutely.
And if you get rejected, do not treat it as a shut and locked door. You're not auditioning for a movie. It will still be there.
Absolutely. And to clarify, for my internship, I kept calling and getting no response. If you are told no in a case like that, there is a certain amount of understanding when to cut your losses and move on. But
no, exactly. Yeah, keep that in mind. But like, and that's not to say like, oh, we're not looking for something right now. Okay, I'll try again next week. That's not what I'm. But yeah, like I said, I would first look at, who's in your backyard. How can you get involved in there? And then from there, you can grow. It's just casting your net.
Yeah, it is great advice for life in general, not just TTRPGs.
Yeah.
So then, last thing before we wrap up, are there any other miscellaneous things that you want to touch on? Any topics we didn't cover or things that you want to make sure don't get left unsaid before we wrap up?
Yeah, there's one thing. I was talking with Joey Hayek the other week about getting involved in the D&D community. And just to add on to that advice and to impart the advice that they gave me for DMs looking to get involved, understand what you are about. It is much easier to put yourself out there if you know the ABCs of who you are as a DM. Granted, not like an itemized list of every character, but like, I know that I'm a roleplay heavy DM. I know that I like to run campaigns with political intrigue. Those are things that, like if you cast your net, the right fish are going to come. More often than not, you'll get happy players rather than a player who's like, wait a minute, this is just strictly roleplay. I was looking to do combat. Be clear about what you're about.
That is great advice to end off on. Thank you again for coming by and chatting with us.
Of course, thank you for having me.
To wrap things up, can you let our listeners know where they can find you if they want to look into your photography or your projects, anything like that?
So for my photography, I'm mainly on Instagram. I go by the handle EC Weinstock Photos. And for my D&D content, which granted, I'm just starting that account, so I don't really have any content to speak of. I go by the tag DicePotDM.
All right. Well, thank you so much one more time. This has been fantastic. So I really appreciate you coming by and chatting with me.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. This was a wonderful chat. Yeah, thank you.
And thank each and every one of you for listening. One more time, everybody, I'm DnDark, the GM and host of D&Dark. I've been chatting with Eliam Weinstock, and this has been Table Talk. And I hope you enjoyed what we brought to the table. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Table Talk, created, hosted, and edited by myself, DnDark, with artwork by Jordan Nelson. Our guest this episode was Eliam Weinstock. Links to his work can be found in the episode description. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, reach out to us at dndarkpodcast@gmail.com. Our theme song and outro was created by Jeremy Vellucci. Check out more of his works on Instagram at JeremyVellucci_Rec of Time. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time we have a guest take a seat at the table.